we are talking about reopening the economy. Smithfield Foods set to reopen its pork processing plant in South Dakota after being closed for more than 3 weeks after hundreds there contracted COVID-19. Concerns over the meat supply chain have been mounting as coronavirus cases hit processing plants across the country. The number of COVID-19 cases linked to meat plants exceeded 10,000 for the first time this week. Joining me right now is South Dakota Senator, Senate Armed Services and Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs Committee member Mike Round. Senator, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Your reaction to what's taking place in these meat processing plants, and I understand that the Chinese Communist government, there's also an angle here because they're taking advantage of this and buying all of this meat at rock bottom prices.
Well, first of all, you can't have a decrease in production of meat, both beef and pork, and not have it impact the shelves at some point. There was some in storage, but we will feel it. We've got to get these plants open and do it safely. Workers have got to be assured that we've got the correct type of equipment in place. And then second of all, the American public has got to be assured that we're going to be able to provide the appropriate amount of meat so that they don't see bare shelves. You got to be able to do both.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that we are going to be able to see a fix here? How do you do both?
Well, first of all, we had asked the president if he would invoke the Defense Production Act. He did it within 48 hours of the time that we made the request. And that allows these companies to get access to the appropriate types of personal protection equipment that these workers will need, very similar to what somebody in a hospital would have to wear. And second of all, they'll have to make some physical changes in a lot of these plants. They're doing that now. Smithfield, in a very short period of time here, has opened up part of their facilities. They're going to be producing ground pork. About 250 of those 3,700 employees will go back to work now. And by the end of May, we hope to have them back in full production again. That's a really good sign. There will be other facilities across the United States that will be doing the same thing. Beef production, hopefully, will have something along a similar line happening as well. But you've got to focus on the fact that they need that same type of equipment as other people do. You can't simply say, you know what, we've got an unsafe work environment, we're going to shut things down. You have to go back in and make sure that the working environment is safe, but you got to go back to work. We have to be able to do both,
Senator,
and we can.
Let me switch gears here, because as we start to see much of the country reopening, the level of worry around budget deficits and debt is rising, certainly within the Republican ranks, I understand. Senate Republicans speaking out on more coronavirus aid spending over fears of a budget deficit. Many are calling on prioritizing the creation of a liability shield for companies instead. How do you see debt and deficits now that we understand that the debt that this country faces is actually now bigger than the size of the economy at $22 trillion?
Well, to begin with, you have to understand where we were last year before we ever had this pandemic come in. We were paying almost $400 billion a year in interest on our debt already. And by the year 2025, CBO is estimating that we will pay more in interest than what we will for defense in this country. So that's where we started from. But now we find ourselves in the middle of a war in itself on this pandemic. You have to win the war first, which means you spend the money you need to survive, to be able to beat this pandemic. And then second of all, you get back to building this economy again as quickly as possible. That's what the president is now focused on. It's what the Senate is focused on. You want to rebuild a GDP so that you can actually afford to finance that debt. And the sooner we get onto it, the better. In the Senate right now, we've had a lot of discussions. Mitch McConnell has brought us all back in. We've been doing face-to-face meetings, appropriately separated, I might add, but nonetheless face-to-face to talk about how we move forward to rebuild the economy and to talk about what we can do to try to limit the amount of debt that we're taking on. Mitch has suggested very strongly that we've got to be able to provide liability protections for those businesses that are trying to open up. We agree, but it's even more than businesses. Don't you want to make sure that if your kids go back to school, that the teachers that are there aren't involved in a class action lawsuit because they're teaching kids and somebody comes home and might have that virus? I mean, those are the types of things that we're talking about. And, the bottom line, it's not anybody in this country that's to blame for this pandemic. We ought to be focusing it on China, which is exactly where this started, the irresponsible way in which it very well may have escaped from that lab. We don't think it was intentional. But nonetheless, China's got a lot to answer on this, and we should be talking about where the blame really lies.
Right, and whether it was intentional or not, your colleague, Senator Tom Cotton, told me a couple of weeks ago that once the Chinese Communist Party figured out how severe this virus would be and the impact on its economy, they made a decision to allow the virus to escape its borders because they did not want China's economy contracting by 20%, the rest of the world contracting by 2%. So they made a decision to allow it to escape its borders rather than keeping it contained in the Hubei province. Now you've got the Chinese ambassador to the UN pushing back, saying that China will not allow any investigation into the origins of this disease until there is, quote, a final victory against the virus. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spoke out yesterday. He slammed China for covering up the vital information that could have been used to combat the coronavirus early on. We know that he's been talking about this for some time. How are you going to get, I mean, I don't think you're ever going to get China to admit how this started.
In most cases, even if this was an accident that it escaped, and it's entirely possible that it was an accident, the cover-up is damning. And in this particular case, I think it's criminal in nature. This isn't just negligence. This is not just gross negligence. This is criminal in nature when you allow this to happen and you don't share the information with the rest of the world for weeks on end. And you allow inside the country, you stop your travel, but you allow those same individuals to travel internationally. And you don't share what you're finding out. This is absolutely wrong. And as I say, this is criminal in nature, and that's the way we've got to be treating it.
Senator, real quick before you go, the president said he's going to let us know in the coming week whether or not China is going to renege on the $250 billion worth of stuff that they're supposed to buy. Do you think they're going to keep their promise?
I don't know. Look, I think they're in disarray as well. Bottom line is we have to recognize that while we would like, excuse me, while we would like to have them as a trading partner, they're going to have to change their behavior, and that's going to be difficult for them to do. Okay. At this point, it's not the Chinese people. It's a regime which literally has decided from day one that we are not only a competitor, but we are an adversary. And they've been treating us that way. They've been stealing our intellectual property. They have been challenging us defensively in the Pacific Rim region. They've made it very clear that it is either us or them on economics. That has not changed.
Yep. All right, we will leave it there. Senator, good to see you this morning. Thank you so much. Senator Mike Rounds joining us. We've got a lot more to come right here